Kamusta kaibigan? Creating a responsive website design can feel overwhelming, right? Especially when you're just starting out. You've got desktop, tablet, and mobile screens you need to design for. And sometimes, it just feels like way too much. But don't worry, in this video, I'm going to teach you how to easily create a responsive grid in Figma and how to use it properly in your website designs like a pro. Once you learn this, creating responsive website designs becomes a lot easier. Plus, your website designs will look clean, consistent, and most of all, professional. Alright kaibigan, let's get started. Okay, so first we need to create our frames for the desktop, tablet, and mobile. To create a frame, click the frame icon in the toolbar or just press F on our keyboard. Once we do that, we'll see a list of device options on the right panel. These are what we're looking to use: desktop, tablet, and phone. Let's start with the desktop. Click on desktop, select desktop, and we've got our desktop frame. Next, click on frame again. Click on tablet, select iPad mini, and we've got our tablet frame. Next, click on frame again. Click on phone, select iPhone 16 Pro, and we've got our mobile frame. Now that all three frames are ready, we're going to start by creating the responsive grid on the desktop first. Then, we'll adjust it later for tablet and mobile. A horizontal grid helps us place our website design elements from left to right. To create our horizontal grid, select the desktop frame, and on the right panel, go to the layout guide, click the plus sign, then select columns. Change the count to 12, keep the type on stretch, change the margin to 80, and change the gutter to 32. Now let me explain what we just created. First, let's talk about count. We're using 12 columns for two simple reasons. Number 1, it's the standard for professional website design. And number 2, 12 is a highly divisible number, which gives us a lot of flexibility when creating different layouts. For example, if we want to create a 2-column layout, just place the content inside the first 6 columns and the next 6 columns. If we want to create a 3-column layout, just place each of the content inside the 4 columns. By the way, we can hide the grid by clicking on the eye icon right here. Or we can press Shift plus G on our keyboard. Next, let's talk about type. In the type options, we'll see 4 choices. But the two we'll use the most are stretch and center. So what's the difference? Center keeps the columns fixed in the middle. Even if you resize the frame, the columns stay the same width. They don't grow or shrink, they just stay centered. This is actually how websites work in real life. But when we're designing inside Figma, that's not what we want. For responsive website design, we use stretch. Stretch makes your columns flexible. When we resize the frame, the columns automatically adjust and stretch with it. This lets us see how our design reacts at different sizes. And that's exactly what we want when designing responsive websites. Next, let's talk about margin. Margin is the spacing around our frame. Basically, it's the empty space we see on the left side and right side of our frame. So how do we know what value to use for our margins? To answer that, we need to understand something called container. A container is the main content area of our website. Think of it like this. Our container is the photo, and the margin is the matting around the photo inside the frame. It provides space for our design to breathe. Personally, I use a container width of 1280 pixels. If we look at the desktop frame we created, it has a width of 1440 pixels. And we set the margin to 80 pixels on each side. If we subtract the frame width, 1440 pixels, and the total margins, 160 pixels, you'll get a container width of 1280 pixels. If we create a rectangle that spans across all 12 columns, you'll notice its width is 1280 pixels. which matches my preferred container size. There's no strict rule here. You can adjust your margins and container however you want. It all depends on your design preference and the overall look you're going for. Next, let's talk about gutter. Gutter is the spacing between each column in our grid. Right now, it's set to 32 pixels. That's just my personal preference because I like giving my designs a bit more room to breathe. Again, there's no strict rule here. You can make your gutter smaller or bigger depending on the overall look you're going for. And don't worry, the more professional websites you design, the more your eye will develop, and choosing the right gutter size will start to feel natural. A vertical grid helps us place our website design elements from top to bottom. To create a vertical grid, select the desktop frame, then go to the layout guide, click the plus sign again, but this time select rows. Change the count to 1000, change the type to top, change the height to 4, and change the gutter to 4. Now let me explain what we just created. First, let's talk about count. We set it to 1000 because we want to cover the whole height of the frame. If your design gets longer, you can simply adjust the count number. But usually, 1000 is more than enough to cover most designs. Next, let's talk about type. We set it to top because we want the rows to start from the most top part of the frame going down. Next, let's talk about height and gutter. We set the value to 4 because we're using a 4-point grid system. It simply means that the spacing between all your elements should always be divisible by 4. For example, if I move this rectangle down, you'll notice it snapped to values like 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, and so on. Basically any number divisible by 4. And this means our vertical grid is working correctly. There's also what we call an 8-point grid system. The only difference is that it uses the base value of 8 instead of 4. So if you're wondering why we're not using an 8-point grid system here, it really just comes down to preference. I personally use a 4-point grid system because it gives me control over the sizing and spacing in my website designs. Pro tip: when we press the down arrow, our element will be moved by 1 pixel. That's what we call a small nudge. And if we press Shift plus down arrow, it moves by 10 pixels. That's what we call a big nudge. But since we're using a 4-point grid system, a 10 pixel big nudge doesn't really work for us. So we need to adjust the big nudge so it matches our grid system. To do that, go to File, then Settings, then Nudge Amount. Keep the small nudge to 1 and change the big nudge to 4. Now when we use a big nudge, our elements will move 4 pixels at a time. Now that we have finished creating our responsive grid on desktop, let me show you how to use it properly. For a full width layout, create an element that spans all 12 columns. For a 2-column layout, create elements that each span 6 columns. For a 3-column layout, create elements that each span 4 columns. And for a 4-column layout, create elements that each span 3 columns. Here's another example. Let's say you want a 2-column layout, but you want the left side to be wider than the right side. All you have to do is set the right element to span 4 columns and set the left element to span 8 columns. If you want the opposite, set the left element to span 4 columns and set the right element to span 8 columns. When you design this way, you stop guessing sizes and spacing. It totally removes any random sizing, spacing, and weird decimal values. And your website designs will look clean, consistent, and professional. Pro tip: we create a responsive grid to guide our design, but that doesn't mean that you always have to follow it perfectly. Sometimes it's totally okay to break the rules. Just make sure that when you do it with intent and purpose. For example, in this website design, you'll notice that the header is wider than the container grid. That's because we wanted the header to stretch across the full width of the frame and not just the container. Here's another example. You'll notice these images extend beyond the edge of the frame. And that's because this section is a carousel. The images slide from right to left to showcase more content. Here's another example. Here, we're using a 2-column layout, but we're not using the full 6 columns for each side. Instead, we're using 4 columns each and spacing them evenly to create a clean and balanced layout. Now let's create the responsive grid for our tablet. The first step is to go back to our desktop frame and select both the horizontal and vertical grids we created. Press Command+C to copy on Mac, Ctrl+C on Windows, then select our tablet frame. Press Command+V to paste on Mac, Ctrl+V to paste on Windows. You'll notice that it looks weird, but that's totally normal because we need to adjust a few things first. On the horizontal grid, click the Layout Guide settings. Change the count to 8, change the margin to 40, and change the gutter to 24. And that's it. We've adjusted the responsive grid for our tablet frame. You'll notice that we're using 8 columns here instead of 12. That's because the tablet frame has a smaller width compared to the desktop frame. Now let's create the responsive grid for our mobile frame. We're going to follow the exact same steps we did for the tablet frame. Copy and paste a grid, and then change the settings. But this time, change the count to 4, change the margin to 20, and change the gutter to 16. And that's it. We've adjusted the responsive grid for our mobile frame. You'll notice this time we're using 4 columns. That's because the mobile frame has the smallest width compared to the desktop and tablet frames. Now it's time for your bonus lesson. I'm going to teach you how to make our responsive grid reusable so we can use it on multiple pages. Alright, let's say we want to use our responsive grid across multiple pages. Sure, you could just copy and paste our desktop frame, but here's the problem. If we ever want to change something in our responsive grid, let's say for example, we want to change the color of our columns into blue. Notice that the change only happens on the frame we selected. All the other frames stayed the same, which means we'll have to update them one by one. And that's something that we don't want. So to fix this, we need to create something called style. To create a style, first select our desktop frame, and in the layout guide, click Apply Styles. Then click on Create Style. Let's name it Responsive Grid-Desktop. If you click on More Options, you'll see both our horizontal and vertical grid. Click on Create Style. Now, whenever we create a new desktop frame, we can apply our responsive grid instantly just by selecting the style we created. And here's the best part. If we want to change anything on our responsive grid, select our desktop frame and under Layout Guide, click on the style we created and click on Edit Style. Now, if we change the color of our column into blue, you'll see that the changes apply immediately to all desktop frames that are using our responsive grid style. By the way, I'm only changing the color here for simplicity. But in real projects, you might be changing the values for the type, width, margin, and gutter. So what about the responsive grid for the tablet and mobile frames? Same exact process. Create a separate style for the responsive grid on our tablet frames. And create a separate style for the responsive grid on our mobile frames. Pro tip: when we click anywhere on the canvas, we'll see all of the styles we've created in the right panel. From there, we can select any style and update it whenever we need to. And that's it, kaibigan. I hope you learned a lot and found this video really helpful. If you want to see how easy website design can be, even as a beginner, make sure to watch this next video.